You are a whole being. So oftentimes we are acting from a perspective of being a fragmented being. We identify as fragments. And so you might notice if you pay attention that you think of yourself as one person, but actually you're not acting as one person consistently. Think about this. In different contexts, you act differently. You have a different experience of yourself in different contexts. So in different types of relationships, you will have a different experience of yourself. If you have like at work, you might have one experience of yourself. In relationship with your spouse, you have a different relationship, a different sense of yourself. In relationship with your children, you have a different sense of yourself. If you're having a quote good day, you have one experience of yourself. If you're having a so-called bad day, you're having a different experience of yourself. There are so many different identities and roles that you take on that you identify with. And in that moment, this veil of delusion comes over you and you think, oh, I'm the same person. You're not the same person. You've taken on a different identity. So we have most of us have dozens, hundreds, thousands of unintegrated, fragmented subpersonalities and identities that we identify with variously at different points in time. And we don't even recognize that we're doing it. But of course, our experience will reflect that because our experience will be one that's unintegrated. And what I mean by that is that you might have roles. In some moments, you will feel very competent, very confident, very happy, very peaceful. And then in other moments, in other roles, in other identifications, you'll feel totally the opposite. You'll feel depressed, angry, worthless, hopeless, fearful. If you don't have awareness of yourself as a total being, then it becomes virtually hopeless because you're identified as fragments, thinking that you're the same person in all of those situations, which is not true. It's a hypnotic trance. So here, the possibility is to recognize that you are a whole being and that you can organize and integrate in a coherent fashion all of your content so that you're not suffering from these same problems anymore. This is something that for most people requires a lot of repeated exposure and then direct exploration on a regular basis in order for this to really start to click. For those who choose to continue to explore it, then you will see the fruits of it as you continue to explore it in your life. So you at that highest level, I'm using the term highest level, but we could say most fundamental level or lowest level, however you want to understand it. But you at that level, as formless awareness, as the source, you are free of content, or I should say independent of content. So the content does not matter at all to you at that level. The content can't touch you. You are independent of it. You have no form, no substance. So you're like space. Is space affected by the content? No, it is not. So imagine if you have a room and you move the furniture around in the room. Is the space affected? And the answer to that is no. The space is unaffected by the rearrangement of the furniture. Rearrangement of the furniture cannot affect space because space is not an object. So if you have two pieces of furniture and you try to move them into the same space, then there's a problem, right? If you have two chairs and you try to put them into the same space, it won't work unless you're working with a different type of physics. But in our normal sense, you try to put two chairs in the same space, it won't work. You can have one in that space and another one has to be in a different space. Space is unaffected by the objects. So objects interact with one another. Space does not interact with objects. So at the highest level, at the level of formless self, at the level of pure awareness, pure consciousness, you are unaffected by any of the content. Now, this is good news because when you recognize and integrate this aspect of yourself, this gives you a very important perspective. Think about this. Better yet, feel it, notice it. If you're able to touch upon that now, if you're able to just be that space of formless awareness right now, if you just let go of the attachment to all the content for just an instant, notice what that does. You have no problems. Now, for most of us, we cannot maintain that. So I'm not suggesting that you should try to maintain that. I'm just saying for this one instant, when you let go of all the attachment to all the other stuff, just notice that there's no problem. It's actually impossible for there to be a problem. Nothing that could happen could be a problem to formless awareness because there's no attachment to any identity. There's no attachment to anything. Nothing that happens to any object or anything at any level of any of the content matters at all to this level. Why? Because think about it. We've already hopefully directly seen this, that all the content comes from this source and returns to this source. So this source is already the source of all the stuff. It's already in and of itself absolutely complete and total. So how could it matter at all what happens to any of the content? It doesn't at this level. So again, being able to have this perspective, being able to access this perspective is enormously helpful because think about it. How many times are you stressed out? A lot of times, right? You're stressed out, feeling anxious, worried, angry, fearful, all these things. Why is that? It's because you're identified at with a particular point of view, a particular piece of content. And from that level of identification, you have an agenda. You have certain needs, you have certain desired outcomes, and you think my okayness depends upon that. So then, of course, you're going to feel stressed because you're threatened. When you can at least momentarily release that identification and shift to this highest level perspective where you have no problems, no identification, you gain the broadest possible perspective, and this will give you the most possible information, which will then allow you to be able to have new insights should you wish to then try and solve that problem. You cannot try to solve the problem from the level of pure consciousness because at the level of pure consciousness, there is no problem. But here at the level of pure consciousness, you have no agenda, which gives you access to all of the information unbiased. You don't have access to that at the level of identification. If you're a fearful person, angry person, you don't have that because you've cut yourself off. You're fragmented. You're just that limited identity in that moment. So it's very helpful to be able to release, at least temporarily, that identification and recognize yourself as that wholeness, that source, which gives you totality, which gives you all of the information, which is very, very helpful. Number one, it relieves the stress, at least temporarily. And number two, if and when you then identify again with some point of view, you then have greater resourcefulness. You have greater information, which allows you then to be able to solve the problems more effectively. Okay. So that's really, really important and helpful. But again, as I said, most of us are not going to be able to maintain that total release of all identification. It's not realistic and it's not even desirable for most of us because again, that would be a different path. That's the path of the renunciate. That's if you're going to go sit in a cave in the Himalayas and you're not going to have relationships, you're not going to have money, you're not going to attend to your body, you're not going to do any of those things. That's a different path. So it's not desirable for most of us to stay there, but it is very desirable for most of us to be able to access that. Now, when we access that, what that also allows us to do is to, again, notice the totality of the whole being. So the whole being is not exclusively formless. It is also that form. And that form includes all of the content. In fact, it includes all possible content. So this gives us more choices when we can step back and recognize we detach from all of the identification, when we detach from all the content momentarily, It gives us the broadest possible view, so we are now aware of all of the possible content, not just the one little speck that we had previously identified with. So now we can start to choose from that broadest perspective, what do I actually want? It also allows us to see how we have organized that content. Remember, I said that that content consists of just these five senses, but it's variously organized, infinitely organized into various different types of different permutations. So you can have uh, a permutation. Think about this. So we think typically we're taught to think that things just happen, like anger just happens, and anger is just a thing. But if you actually start to inspect your experience and you view it through this lens, you'll have to start to recognize that anger is not just something that happens and it's not just some random thing. Actually, anger is something that has structure, and that structure consists and its content consists of these five senses. So you actually represent that anger in a particular way. It actually has a structure and has location in your experience. So you can actually start to notice that, identify that, and then you're no longer powerless. You actually have the ability to start to make changes. Because if you're just locked into just saying it's anger, I'm an angry person, I'm experiencing anger, that person did something and now I'm angry, you have very few choices. You've just locked yourself in to being non-resourceful and just being an angry person, a reactive angry person who has no choice. When the trigger happens, you are an angry person. As long as you've identified in that way, then that's just how it is. You might hope that it will be a different way. You might wish and pray that it will be a different way, but until you actually have the knowledge, it's not going to change. When you have the knowledge, then it can change. So you can actually start to notice, what is this? What is the actual experience? What is the structure of it? Where do I experience it? It has a location. Pay attention. So you could just notice right now, in whatever you're experiencing right now, you can give a label to it or not, but just notice whatever you're experiencing. Notice that that experience consists of these five senses, right? You're seeing, tasting, smelling, feeling, and hearing. And that all of that has location. So in space, you've constructed all of this in your own space, in the space of consciousness that you are. You have constructed a space that has three dimensions. So you experience things as having locations in that space. If you don't identify where those locations are, it's very difficult to work with it. But once you've identified where the location is, suddenly it becomes workable. So, and this is applicable and helpful for all kinds of experiences, but initially I find that it's especially helpful for difficult or unwanted experiences. So let's take any unwanted experience that you have, that you commonly have, that you struggle with: fear, anger, resentment, guilt, shame, worry. And then imagine that now. So find some reference that you have for that. So some experience, some recent experience of that, some particular experience of it, some event that triggered that for you. And then notice that whatever that experience is, it actually has a location for you. And it can, so by location, I mean literally in three dimensions, there's some place where you perceive it and experience it. And it has qualities. So what are those qualities? Heavy, light, closed, open, still, moving, big, small. So the actual experience has location, it has qualities. With that awareness, you actually have the ability to start to make change based on your intention. So if all you do is call this experience by some name, then you've cast a spell over yourself, right? And then you imagine that you're powerless. So if you just say, "Oh, I'm just experiencing this anger again. Oh, I'm experiencing that anxiety again. Oh, I'm experiencing the worry again," then you've cast a spell over yourself, and you give yourself the impression that you're powerless. But if you actually start to notice, what is this actual experience? This actual experience consists of five senses, and it exists somewhere in the space of myself. I've given it a location. Find the location, notice its qualities. How do you experience it? Then you can start to actually change it. Instead of it being this thing that you don't that is happening to you, it's actually something in your experience that you can change. So play with it. If you don't like the experience, change it. If it's a closed feeling, well, open it. If it's a heavy feeling, lighten it. It's not even to try and fix it. It's just to explore it. So I'm not saying that every time you feel a heavy feeling and you don't like that heavy feeling, you should make it light. I'm just saying just start to play with it so you can just start to notice what it actually is instead of just falling prey to the notion that this thing is happening to you. You can actually start to notice that you are you are the actual master if you allow yourself. If you allow yourself, you can actually have mastery over your own experience.